All right, joining me once again here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is my friend Maya Schenwar. Maya is a journalist and the executive director of Truth Out, which you can find at truth-out.org. She is the author of the new book, Locked Down, Locked Out, Why Prison Doesn't Work and How We Can Do Better. You can follow her on Twitter at Maya Schenwar. Maya, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
All right, so Maya, listeners may remember that we actually had you on the show several months ago to talk about your sister and how she actually gave birth in prison in Illinois. The book actually covers that. It covers a lot more things, but let's begin. If listeners don't remember, tell us again about your sister.
Well, yeah, I got interested in this subject 9 years ago because my sister had become incarcerated. This was 9 years ago. She went to juvenile detention. And over the past 9 years, it's been kind of in and out, which is the story of a lot of people who go to prison. It's not just a one-time thing. So I wrote this book in part about that and then about the larger issues. I interviewed a lot of other people, and I correspond with a number of pen pals in prison. But I think that when it comes to my sister's story, although it's not representative of a larger population, I think no one story is, it does kind of demonstrate this pattern that prison perpetuates of acting as a violent institution and traumatizing people and bringing them back. The latest time that my sister went to prison, she was pregnant and had to give birth behind bars. So that's one of the things I address in the book is just the brutality of that experience, not only the birth and how terribly the prison system treats women and especially mothers, but also the fact that like many other aspects of the prison system, giving birth in prison is about separation. It's about the fact that eventually you, as the mother giving birth, will be torn from your baby at the end of the experience.
It's weird. It's like, and again, just in the title, the subtitle of it, How Prison Doesn't Work, I want to start digging into that because one of the main things you write about in the book is how the importance of how your family, your friends, your community, those are actually the things that you write actually make life matter. And it actually keeps you going and it keeps you alive, essentially. And when someone goes to prison, that actually you have all that yanked from you, and while some people be like, oh well, they have to, that's the point of prison, right. you're away from the things that matter. It's like, well, okay, but what is the actual consequences of that? Is this actually something that rehabilitates people, or is it actually, are you actually going to make the matter worse and actually cause more harm? So talk a little bit about that, because that actually is such a main part of your book.
Yeah, I think you've got it right. And it's so funny because I'll be talking about my book with people and they'll say, yeah, I get it, prison doesn't work, but prison. Like, yeah. It always comes back to prison. Like, but why not prison?
Yeah.
Like, well, it can be true that we may have an idea that is embedded in all of our heads and is a common practice in our society, but it's founded on not only a faulty logic, but also on racism and sexism and ableism and all these things, especially racism. And when you start digging into it and thinking about, well, why do we incarcerate people? Because a lot of people will say, okay, yeah, prison is racist, prison is anti-black, but we need it anyway.
Right.
Like, we just need to do it differently. We need to do it in a non-racist way. Well, first of all, that's not possible because that's what it's grounded in. But second of all, the idea that we need prison, I think, is something that we have to constantly be challenging, especially on this level of connection, because it really is grounded in this logic that we need to isolate people in order to make society better. That in order to make ourselves safe, whoever we mean by ourselves, we need to extract certain people from society, break their bonds with their families and their communities, and then somehow eventually bring them back, because 95% of people in prison are coming back into their communities. Bring them back and they'll somehow be whole again, or they'll be better, in quotes. And there's no real explanation for how this is supposed to happen. And what you are doing is breaking down those bonds, not like somehow shaving off the bad stuff. Instead, you're shaving off the good stuff. You're breaking down relationships that motivate people to change their lives. And I think, on the one hand, we have to think about, okay, we're incarcerating people for things that didn't harm anyone, and that's very important to emphasize that, when you're incarcerating people for things like drug possession or things like stealing a candy bar, that's really bad. And, incarcerating those people doesn't work either. But my book is also challenging the idea that we should incarcerate people who do cause harm, because there isn't this thing happening where they come out and then the potential for that is gone. I think that the thing that people find most challenging about this is that right now, the challenge to mass incarceration that most liberals are advocating, I think, is this idea that, we're incarcerating the wrong people. Mm-hmm. As opposed to this idea of, okay, when you isolate and confine and cut off people, any people, does that do something to them that's actually going to be helpful for society?
Yeah, and actually, the one of the big questions the book asks is not even what is the effect on those people, which that effect is horrible. On the people in prison, it's bad. But you broaden it out. I mean, and it's like, what does it affect on the families? But what is the broader effect on the collective society?
Right.
And again, you cannot look at the prison system in the United States and think that this is actually doing something and making the country better. It's not. It is actually very, very broken.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's also something that needs to be inserted into the dialogue, that we always talk about, we incarcerate 2.3 million people or 2.4 million people, and the United States has 5% of the world's prisoners, or 5% of the world's population, but 25% of its prisoners. But
Right.
We're not talking about, who else is affected? Millions and millions and millions more people are very directly affected by prison, starting with the families of people in prison and the close loved ones of people in prison, who are often affected not just emotionally, which is really important, and psychologically, but also very often financially, because people going to prison many times are the primary wage earner in a family. They're sometimes the ones supporting that family and keeping it afloat, especially in situations when that family is very poor, which is many prisoners.
Yeah.
Then that person going to prison might just be the last straw. So that's just one example of a situation where one person going to prison has this constellation of other very negative effects.